Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Do you know where your shipments are? How visibility technology can mitigate cargo theft and security risk. We're excited you could join us. My name is Laura Beth Ezel, and I'll be moderating today's event. Now, in this presentation, we'll explore how companies are using visibility technology to mitigate risk and prevent cargo theft, with an emphasis on high-value goods like electronics, medical equipment, industrial equipment, precious stones, gems, jewelry, etc. And a portion of the discussion is dedicated to cross-border shipping. So we are thrilled to be joined by our speakers today. We have Josh Allen, who's the Chief Revenue Officer with Tive, and Tony Pelly, who's the Practice Director, Security and Resilience, BSI. But before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. Please note that the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button located in the top right corner of your presentation window. If you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget that's located on the bottom left corner of your console. Now, we encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We will try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we just run out of time, it will be answered later via email, so please know that we do capture all your questions. Well, to kick off, I'd like to ask each of our speakers to provide a quick introduction of themselves and their work. Josh, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. My name is Josh Allen. I am the Chief Revenue Officer here at Tive. So I have responsibility across our go-to-market team, so our marketing team, sales team, customer success, support, partnerships, essentially anything that interacts or engages with our customers and future customers. I've been with Tive for about a year, and prior to coming here, I worked for some large, fast-growing technology companies in the Boston area in particular, such as LogMeIn, CarGurus, and Drift, to name a few. But I'm happy to be here, and this is my first supply chain technology company, so I've learned an awful lot in the last year about the space.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tony Pelly. I'm Practice Director for Security and Resilience at BSI. So in that role, I lead a team of consultants who help companies solve their supply chain risk management challenges, including in areas like cargo theft, help them set up tracking programs, better understand what their risks are so they can begin to mitigate them. I've been working with BSI for the past 11 years and have experience working in about 30 different countries with different types of supply chain risk management and cargo theft challenges. So appreciate the opportunity, everybody, and looking forward to our discussion today.
Absolutely. Thank you both for that. All right, so let's get right to it. Between Josh and Tony, we have a lot of valuable insights to share on cargo theft and transportation risk mitigation, and I'm curious their answers to some of the questions we're going to throw at them today. And our first question is, how serious is this issue, and why do shippers need to be thinking about it and addressing it? Tony, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think it's a more prevalent issue than people typically think, especially for the United States. I think a lot of companies, if they're working internationally, they may recognize that Mexico is higher risk or countries like Brazil are higher risk, but it's a big issue in the United States as well, with the impact running into the billions of dollars. And it's not just sort of the direct impact of the stolen goods themselves, it's the increase in insurance premiums that you see after that, the time and money spent on investigations or remanufacturing of products. In some industries, especially some of the higher end industries or higher value industries like pharmaceuticals or electronics, it can have additional knock-on impacts as well. So with pharmaceuticals, for example, the theft or damage of products can trigger recalls and other types of action that in many cases are much more costly than theft itself. In the technology and electronics space, it can have a sort of destructive impact on production cycles, product launches, and can ruin those efforts in many cases, or at least sort of degrade those efforts, in a pretty significant way.
Yeah, I think I'd also add there, it can disrupt overall availability in terms of being able to stock shelves if you're a retailer. Some of the instances we've seen in like automotive manufacturing, for example, it can bottleneck the assembly line or bring it to a halt if they don't have the right components, the right parts that they need to complete the assembly there. And there can be some pretty significant monetary penalties for the shippers that they have to pay if they're part of it, or the carriers if they're responsible for the goods not arriving on time and not showing up within the ETA window that had been established. So it can be really disruptive and very, very expensive.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So thanks for sharing and just helping to set the stage there, Tony and Josh. So now in your mind, what unique risks arise when freight changes, freight changes hands while using modes like intermodal, where shipments switch from truck to rail to truck?
Yeah, it's I think oftentimes it's when the shipment is at rest, it seems to be its most vulnerable. So these transfer points tend to be natural places where customers experience the most risk and ultimately the most theft. But it's not only a risk of the loss of the goods, but damaging the goods too. And the longer time between transfers, it tends to increase the number of things that can end up happening to the shipment. Oftentimes the amount of cargo that goes missing. And when you think about shipments coming over the water, so overseas, they come into port, they're sitting in drayage before they're getting picked up to be moved over the road. And quite a bit goes missing during those periods. If you think about a container that's sitting in a yard and someone who has access to that yard, there's a lot that happens. And even when it finally gets on the truck and it starts moving, whether it's at a particular truck stop or rest area or place that these vehicles end up on a consistent basis, you can start to track the patterns of different types of shipments and loads that are of high value to thieves.
Yeah, and we see the same thing for rail to road transfers, really any type of transfer. Once it's getting closer to that final mile, that's typically where we see kind of more of the losses in the supply chain. Companies tend to lose visibility at that point. There's more actors involved in the supply chain or distribution chain at that point, and that's where we tend to see a greater number of losses there.
Yeah, really interesting there. And, based on that insightful information that you just shared, what role do visibility platforms and sensors play in helping companies avoid these risks?
Yeah, I'm going to put a little bit of a biased hat on here, but real-time visibility has certainly gained a lot of traction in the last 5 to 6 years. And here at Tide, we like to say we put the real in real time because we actually have a device that's going on the shipment itself. And that matters because if you have this on a shipment, you're going to be able to get the real-time condition of your gear and wherever the stuff is. So we can tell you exactly where it is and what condition it's in versus having to potentially stitch that story together via different pieces of data. And when it comes to theft and security of those shipments, the real-time absolutely matters. One of our customers started actually building geofences around certain shipping lanes because they had classified them as danger zones in places where if a truck was crossing into those lanes, and this happens in different parts of the world, and if we're just talking about the US, different parts of the country, they wanted an alert if a driver was actually moving into that geofence so they could potentially reach out and divert it to a different place. Or if the driver was in that area, they'd call them and just say, make sure you don't stop until you're outside of this area, and then you can pull over and rest. The only way to manage these activities is by using a real-time device that is telling you within meters where your actual shipment is, and then setting up the corresponding alerts so that you're notified when something has changed. And then either our team from a managed services standpoint or the team for the carrier or the shipper, ultimately whomever is responsible for moving the shipment from A to B, can get involved in real time and take action, as opposed to waiting to find out once it arrives at its destination that something has gone wrong, something has potentially been stolen. And you can be more proactive because you can do something about it while it's happening. So if you see an incident occurring, if you've received an alert, there are steps you can take. And depending on the type of product that's being shipped or the lane that it's in or the mode that's being used, there's different types of standard operating procedures that our managed service team will take or the carrier's managed service team will take to be able to intervene. And then if theft does actually occur, so if something does take place, inevitably it ends up going into an insurance claims process. And so now you have real data points on the specific time it happened and where it happened. We've seen evidence of certain insurance providers who will give cargo insurance breaks on premiums if they're using a device like a Tive because they know that if they're tracking in real time, it should lower their claims processes over time. On our device, we have light sensitivity as an alert that we can trigger. So if the back of the truck is open, we can tell you exactly when that event occurred and where the truck was when it happened, or the same thing on a rail car if somebody were to open the door. And it matters quite a bit afterward in terms of who's actually liable, like who's responsible for what happened to the goods. And as Tive, being that data provider and source of truth as to when it occurred and where it occurred, makes our device pretty important and helps really kind of bring that case to a close.
Yeah, and I think when we're advising our clients on overall supply chain risk management strategies, gaining that visibility is important, and it's a first step, right? We'll ask them, hey, how do you want to kind of maintain control of the lanes that you're looking at, or maintain visibility into those lanes? And inevitably, they may say, hey, we want to do audits of our suppliers, we want to do audits of our carriers. That's only sort of a point in time, right? The real-time visibility gives you the ability to look beyond that sort of point in time, and to give it sort of an early warning system, even if there's not an actual theft or damage or other event happening. What types of behaviors are happening with those carriers that could lead to higher risk situations, or that exposing your cargo to risk. There's all kinds of incidents that happen where the shipper doesn't necessarily know where their cargo is and only find out after the fact. What real-time visibility allows you to do is pinpoint where that cargo is in a particular point of time. And even if it's not in danger, to understand what types of situations could lead to danger for that cargo. It can help you sort of begin correcting those behaviors and working more efficiently and effectively with your suppliers to secure your cargo.
Yeah, that was an incredible explanation, there, Josh and Tony. And Josh, you said within meters, which just seems unimaginable. So that was really incredible to talk about that. So now let's discuss how a visibility platform, in exchange for a low cost of about 1% the cost of freight insurance, can bring peace of mind, mitigate insurance claims, and keep the supply chain running smoothly.
Yeah, when you think about it in terms of value, so a high value shipment is often classified as something that's $100,000 or more, but a container load or a truckload could be worth $50,000. Or could be worth millions of dollars, depending on what it's carrying and what the payload is, anywhere in between or even above or below. If you think of the insurance costs associated and what it costs on average per shipment, the mitigation of 1 to 2 shipments more than pays for the visibility solution. Like it's a relatively low investment to add not only an additional insurance policy on top of it, but something where you can actually intervene in real time and make changes that help reduce the likelihood that something's going to be stolen. So even if a company has insurance coverage, in fact, the cost of their premiums will go up over time if you continue to have these incidents. And the hassle and the time it takes to go through the whole process is pretty significant. So again, this technology exists with Tive for a small additive cost up front, and with it, the businesses can drive down the overall costs quite substantially.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I would encourage companies to begin, as they're using these solutions, to start tracking that cost and time savings as well. So often, the people that we work with, they'll just hear from their higher ups or their bosses that security is a cost center, that it doesn't contribute return on investment to the business. But if they start asking themselves questions like, how much time and money are they spending on investigations? What is it doing to your insurance premiums if there's continued losses? How often are they able to intervene before something happens? Sort of adding the cost of all of those, you can quickly see that certain security mitigations start to sort of pay for themselves and provide value back to the business. I like to make an analogy with health and safety. They always encourage you to look at sort of the near misses, the puddle on the floor that was found that somebody didn't slip on. I would encourage people to do the same thing for supply chain security and in-transit security. So look at those near misses, cases where a container was sitting for an inappropriately long period of time, in addition to events that actually happen. That can help sort of provide and prove that return on investment for tracking and other security mitigations.
Yeah, great, valuable insights there. So how important is it to have someone monitoring excursion events 24/7? And how does this deliver an extra layer of assurance for shippers?
It's a good question, Laura Beth. I think it's one thing to have the data at your fingertips. It's another thing to be able to actually use the data to take action. And so by having a monitoring team like our managed services team, for example, it guarantees that you can take action in real time while something is happening, not after it happens, but while it's happening. And many customers, many shippers, many carriers, they just don't have enough people on their team internally to be able to manage that themselves. Or they want to give it to a business like ours where it's our area of expertise, and we can navigate it pretty well. We can help set up the standard operating procedure to make sure they're getting the best experience, and potentially their customers are getting the best experience as a result of us intervening. So for example, with high value pharmaceutical shipments that Tony had alluded to earlier, when something goes wrong, it needs to be addressed right away, because you're talking about a very small window of time where a temperature excursion has to be addressed for those goods to still be usable on the back end once it's shipped. And if those goods arrive with an excursion event triggered, there's a whole other process that has to go through. It has to go through quarantine. It has to be rechecked before it can be approved for consumer readiness. And so it adds in delay, it adds in cost. Each of our customers that use managed services have a slightly differentiated standard operating procedure, and it's based on the types of goods they're moving, from food to pharmaceuticals and everything in between, where they're moving them from, what modes they're using, and then what action they want us to take when we see an alert happen. Some of them want us to call a truck driver. Some of them want us to call their control center so that they can take over. But we've had examples where we've been able to recover high value goods that were stolen in transit because we were intervening very quickly while it was happening. And so the ability to recover those goods is so significant, and not only pays for the value of a solution like Tive, but is going to reduce their premiums and is going to increase their ability to get these goods to the shelves and ultimately the end user that was supposed to have them in the first place.
And I think that last point is particularly important. One, just in terms of sort of serving the customer and sort of keeping that in mind. But second, in terms of weaving other departments into supply chain security. The problem that we see frequently with our clients is that their security teams are sort of fundamentally reactive. Something happens and they react to it. If you're able to sort of see in real time what's happening to your freight, and those SOPs and those responses are managed appropriately, in a way it sort of makes supply chain security everybody's problem. If you're a pharmaceutical company, you may have quality involved. Most companies will have their logistics and shipping departments involved in some way. And it's really important to sort of hammer home that supply chain security is a quality issue as well, especially in those highly sensitive or high value industries. And it's an issue that is important for your customers and clients as well. And so we see that it's a good way to get broader buy-in into supply chain security and show the value of supply chain security, as I mentioned earlier, not just for security's sake, not just to avoid the loss, but to ensure the overall health and resilience of your supply chain as well.
Yeah, and what threats are impacting cross-border shipments, and how can these issues be addressed or mitigated with a real-time visibility platform that's global in scope?
Yeah, and that's a good point. You do typically see a different set of risks when you're dealing with cross-border traffic than if you're looking at just domestic shipments. In addition to the actual theft of shipments, there may be risks of somebody putting something into a shipment, interfering or tampering with the shipment in some way. A common problem we see with companies that are doing business in Mexico, there's quite a bit of smuggling that occurs with drugs, other products, people, all kinds of different things. In-transit tracking can help you figure out if the truck has been diverted to a location where it's not supposed to be, where something like that may be occurring, or if it's staying for too long in a location where it's not supposed to be, and then you can intervene in those cases. Is it just a case of a customs inspection or customs clearance taking too long, or some other sort of unexpected holdup? They're then able to get in touch with maybe their trade compliance teams or the customs authorities directly themselves to sort of deal with those sorts of issues and help push that through and make the supply chain more efficient, while also avoiding those types of risks. Like I mentioned, it can help manage some of those unique risks that you see in cross-border transportation, in addition to sort of all of the typical ones that you would see with a domestic shipment.
Yeah, I think when moving freight cross-border, we see a lot of issues with trucks, being pulled off the road or stopped. And you think about coming up through Mexico, getting close to the U.S. border. The cartels are involved, and so these trucks will be empty. The goods they're not even making it to their destination. They're not even making it to their next loading zone or inspection point. And so, we work with our customers to help figure out where the red zones are, where the safe zones are, where the safe routes are, and the places they can move the truck fairly comfortably, where we haven't seen incidents or things of that nature. And so we're trying to help in certain areas throughout Latin America, but in particular, when you get into the Mexican corridor approaching the U.S., just to make sure the goods are making it to the border so they can cross over.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And, can you give us any specific examples of companies you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, we legitimately see theft in almost every good you could imagine, from berries and food, so meats and poultry, electronics, candy. Realistically, there's a secondary market for anything. So anything that has value, or the components that have value, we see them getting stolen. And as I mentioned, some of the cartels that have control down there, it's part of their operating business model and what they do. And so, their priority and their use case, if we think of the use case that I'll refer to is a shipper, a candy manufacturer, they were using the light sensor to be able to pinpoint where a theft event was occurring so they could intervene. But temperature also matters. If you think about, your average temperature coming up through Mexico, most of those shipments were happening on reefer trucks. So they wanted to see temperature in addition to being able to see geolocation and light events if the trailer door was being open. So with one device in our platform, you're able to see temperature, you're able to see location, you're able to see whether or not there's a light event and an alert, and we can trigger all of those based on the alerts they have configured and set up. So because it could be theft that they're worried about one day, or it could be the goods getting dropped and damaged and they want to see that the accelerometer told them there was a shock event, or it could be that the temperature is starting to rise up because they have the pallets stacked too high on the reefer truck and the air isn't circulating properly. So it's not just measuring the one condition, we're measuring across these multiple conditions in addition to saying, here's where your stuff is. So whether it's damage or goods being stolen or temperature excursions, things that can go wrong or things that can affect the quality of the product, all of those are being measured with Tive in the same device.
Yeah, and I think for us, companies typically come at it from either one of two ways. Either they've had an incident or there's an event that causes them to want to use in-transit tracking, and then they realize they can use it for much more things that are quality related, the different use cases that Josh has talked about, or they'll use it from sort of the other direction, a more sort of proactive and forward-looking way. We worked with a company that was using in-transit tracking in order to see if they wanted to use a particular rail route. So without using real product, they were able to determine that sort of the vibration and that the sudden drops that were occurring on the rail route, made it so they didn't want to use it for their most sensitive and newest product. And it also helps companies that we work with, when there is a damage claim or when there is a quality issue, it helps them sort of trace that back, track it back. As Josh mentioned, was there too much vibration or other issues like that in transit that may have caused that issue? So we see both sort of, backward-looking and forward-looking uses of in-transit tracking to help with overall supply chain risk management.
Yeah, and why do companies need to pay closer attention to cargo theft and security risk mitigation now versus waiting until it's too late to be proactive about it?
I mean, the reality is the technology exists today. So the cost of staying the same and not tracking your shipments, your high value shipments in real time is much higher than the cost of changing and introducing a new technology that can help you with this. And we know that when companies build their budgets at the beginning of the year, they've already built a certain percentage of expected losses in as a part of that. And there's an opportunity to significantly improve against that. So any improvement against that has an impact on your bottom line ultimately. And when you stay the same, there's just no improvement to the current performance. So when you think about it as a relative cost versus what they're paying for insurance coverage and the cost of the lost shipment, both like hard costs of the goods and also the soft costs included with the work that has to be done to go through the claims process to essentially cover the whole case. It doesn't take much in terms of lost goods to add up quickly, and then more than cover the cost of a solution to help mitigate against it. In the food industry, for example, on average, it's built in about 2% for expected spoilage or loss during shipment. But then when you get into electronics, designer clothing and handbags, automotive, rocket parts, you name it, pharmaceuticals, there's a percentage of goods that are being shipped that get lost, stolen, damaged, and it's a very expensive problem to walk away from, and it's much less expensive to go and solve it. The technology exists, and it's a small investment when you look at the relative costs of not doing anything to mitigate it.
Yeah, and just to sort of zoom out a little bit from there, consumers and executives are much more focused on their supply chain than they have been really than ever before. Just working in this industry, I've had family members call me up and say, "Hey, why is my couch late?" Consumers do notice now much more quickly than they used to when there are issues in the supply chain, and in many cases, even one shipment going missing or being stolen can have a major impact on the overall supply chain, consumers, and their company. Never mind the sort of 2% loss rates. We've worked with clients where 1 out of every 50 shipments was going missing or there was an issue with the shipment. And so it's just one more stress to add to all the other supply chain stresses. Our supply chains are very, very sort of under a lot of stress, closely attenuated. And so any one issue can have sort of cascading effects throughout the supply chain. So if companies are able to reduce that risk, there's a good reason to sort of do that now rather than wait for it to become a larger problem.
Yeah, thank you both so much for these insights today. And I'd like to shift now to some questions from our audience that we've got in today. So let's jump right into these. And the first question here is, how can my company use technology to reduce cargo theft on our high value shipments?
Yeah, and I think the important part of that question is high value shipments. I think that's a great place to start, especially if you're having issues with either certain modes of transportation or certain shipping lanes, or maybe some carriers that have struggled with theft. So the technology exists, and I would encourage you to take a look. We do run what we call a proof of value process with most of the customers who sign on with Tithe, so they can run certain lanes, they can run certain shipments and test it, get the data. And many times what we see is that, especially in lanes that are having problems, we can very quickly show within a couple of weeks' time our ability to intervene and either save a shipment or help divert a shipment in a way that, with the analogy Tony used, you avoid some of those puddles that were sitting there on the floor, and avoid what could have been an unhappy event for that particular shipment.
Yeah, and we encourage our clients as well to really think about what high value means, right? I think a lot of times people think, well, our highest value lane is the one where there's the most volume, where there's the most actual value of the goods. But we encourage people to sort of pair that with the underlying level of risk to understand that a bit better, and to plug it into sort of a kind of a system for managing risk in their company and across their lanes, right? Because they may have areas where they want to focus. High value may not necessarily mean just in terms of monetary value. It may be because production is constrained in some way. It's of particular importance to a particular group of consumers. So really consider what high value means when thinking about using tracking technology.
Yeah, and another question here that kind of goes along with that. Do you have any examples of companies that have used your technology to thwart problems of high value cross-border shipments?
Yeah, I mean, we have a little over 500 customers here at Tithe, and I'd say somewhere in the range of about 20% of them are doing cross-border work, and we have many examples. In particular, when you look at the Mexican corridor coming up into the U.S., we have many examples on a weekly basis with those customers that we have there, where they are telling us that because of our technology, they were able to intervene or they had the data points to be able to go to their insurance provider to let them know what happened, where it happened, why it happened, and then ultimately kind of who's at fault. So even on the insurance claims process, if they weren't able to recover the load, they're still able to bring it to resolution a little bit faster with the information. So yes, it's a very common thing for us.
And we've worked with clients to use it in a very proactive way as well. There was one lane that we were looking at in Europe between a manufacturing site and a sort of primary DC, where every single time we noticed, just based on tracking, there was a stop in a particular high-risk location. And so we were able to then sort of take that to the carrier, take that to the logistics and supply chain teams and say, look, there's sort of billions of dollars at risk here on a sort of yearly basis. Let's try and correct this behavior. Let's try and put in place protocols and other sorts of mitigations to make sure that these types of stops don't happen. So it was kind of the early warning system in that case. You know, there wasn't necessarily an actual loss yet, but just the potential for loss was enough. And the potential for loss that we were able to show through the tracking technology was enough to get the client to pay attention, basically, and to get the carrier to pay attention as well.
Great. Thank you both for taking those on. Okay, another one here, and that's how can we go about evaluating our options?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be Tive biased on this one, but I would recommend if again, we will do the proof of value pilots. We typically work with shippers that are doing higher volumes. So you think about over 100 high value loads a month plus. And we're happy to do a proof of value. We're happy to get you some devices in hand so that you can run tests across a few lanes. We have a sales team and an account management team here that helps with the initial configuration to set it up. And that way you can see it in action. You can see it on your loads. You can see where it is. You can ask questions of our team in terms of how to configure, how often should I get the alerts and what do I want to look for, and what do I set the sensitivity of the alert to from a light setting standpoint? Like all that stuff we can help you out with.
Yeah, and to go back to what I mentioned earlier, I would encourage companies to think about what their objective is and what risk they are trying to avoid. Is it more quality focused, where they are worried about shipments being damaged in transit? Is theft a problem? And how does that sort of fit into their overall security management system? So do they have a way to respond to the issues that will be flagged by in-transit tracking, right? So that will help them evaluate their options. You know, what will give us the best information that we need to then sort of act on and improve behaviors or improve performance in our carrier base, basically.
Great. All right. Another one here from our audience. That's, can you explain how Tive's trackers work on a truckload of goods?
Yeah, so we essentially, the device has a start button on it. And once you push it, it will light up. That signals that the device has been turned on and is now looking to form a connection. And we connect via cellular, Wi-Fi, GPS. It's the only device that has all three kind of in one. So it can start communicating right away. And as soon as it's turned on, it's going to go with that shipment. We recommend on a truckload, on a full truckload, that you're putting it on the last pallet. We find that gives the most accurate readings when it comes in particular to temperature and what we're talking about here, which is light sensitivity for theft reasons. And then the tracker will stay on that shipment through all of its transfer points. And if you think about it from a pallet standpoint, it's going where the pallet goes. So if the pallet gets moved from one truck to another, or from a truck to a container, or from a container to a rail car, it's going to stay with that shipment through those modes of transportation, and we're going to track it the whole way through.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add there, but I would say just in very, very high risk environments like Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, also consider, I think as Josh has mentioned too, like what other things are thieves trying to do in those areas? So consider kind of jamming. Is there an alert that's sent when a signal is jammed? Are there potential black spots in coverage as well? That just know how you're going to manage those also. And placing multiple devices can help with those things in different cases. So just kind of consider those different types of scenarios as well.
Great. All right. Thank you for answering that one there. We want to slip in another one here, and that's how about a mixed load, LTL? How are the trackers applied and managed? Which is a great follow-up to that other one.
It is, and our device is really meant to be shipment specific. It's why we created it, because there's lots of telematics devices out there that are in the trailers, on the trucks already. This is meant to be shipment specific, so you know exactly where your stuff is. And we have some customers that are using this device in a smaller box, but because, like for example, in pharmaceuticals, their contents are so valuable and are so sensitive to damage or temperature excursion, they're putting this device in there to make sure that they're getting an accurate location and an accurate measurement. So we may have mixed loads or LTL truckloads where you have multiple type devices in these different boxes or different pallets or different, because the shipment is then going to get broken down and spread out across different distribution centers, or has different store locations that it's being delivered to. So depending on the accuracy and what you want to know and how valuable that shipment is, you can have multiple devices on it, or in a mixed load environment. It's really up to you having the most visibility into that specific shipment that you care most about.
Yeah, I think that sort of gets back to what I mentioned earlier, which is sort of begin engaging or thinking about tracking with sort of your objectives in mind and your risks in mind as well. So the risk for a smaller pharmaceutical shipment is going to be a bit different than like a full truckload of food. So keep that in mind as you're designing your sort of in-transit tracking strategy.
Yeah, another question here, and that's just, what else can you tell us about Tive's monitoring services and how they can help mitigate risk and reduce theft?
Well, we have built a managed services team here at Tive that follows the sun. So just like our customers who have shipments traveling the world across all types of lanes, all types of modes of transportation, happening 24 hours a day, we have a managed services team that does the exact same thing there. So I think if you are a shipper or a carrier, a 3PL, someone who doesn't feel as though you have the personnel or the team that can actively monitor the alerts that are happening on behalf of your customers or yourselves 24 hours a day, that's when our customers want our managed services offering, because then that way they don't have to worry about it and they know we're responsible for it. We put the appropriate SOP in place that we build with them, and it kind of helps provide peace of mind for those customers. They don't have to worry about it. We're gonna handle the technology, and then we're gonna handle what happens when there is an alert event.
Yeah, not much to add there, really. I think Josh covered it pretty well. I think one of the common sort of stumbling blocks that we see with companies that are trying to implement in-transit tracking is that the kind of all the work behind it. What do you do if there's an alert related to a particular device or a particular lane? That's where we help companies out, and so checking to make sure that that's in place as well is very helpful.
Excellent. Well, you gentlemen handled all those questions perfectly, and I really appreciate all of your time today. I'd like to thank our speakers again, Josh Allen and Tony Pelly, for a great discussion today. We appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise with us. And I'd also like to thank our audience for joining us today. We hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.